We can give it 5 minutes just to allow Zoom to let everyone in.
Coming in thick and fast.
Good afternoon, Steve. Nancy, you'll tell me when you're ready for a go, will you?
Yeah. So we've got 102 people in now. Do you want to wait a few minutes or shall we start, Henry?
Robin, what do you think?
I think we'll start, Henry. Yeah, I think we're
all right. Great.
we're 3 minutes in. So yeah, let's start.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this lovely launch event for what is Water Resources East Norfolk Sustainable Water Management Workshop. We've got a full program for you this afternoon, and some speakers from literally across the world joining us from the west coast of America. So a very warm welcome to our friends across the pond, and welcome to all of you. And I'm particularly grateful to our partners for our launch today, Norfolk County Council, Anglian Water, and the Nature Conservancy. I'm also pleased to welcome Lord Dannett as chair of the Strategic Flood Alliance, because it's all tied in with the value of water. I'm very proud to be the chairman of Water Resources East. I've been chairman since 2014. And I suppose water, living in Broadland as I do, water, I often joke and say mud runs through my veins. But I first got involved on what was then called the Middle Bure Internal Drainage Board when I was in my early 30s. So here, up over 30 years later, I still have a keen and really great interest in all things to do with water. And what is making Water Resources East just so exciting is that it's actually starting to grasp the strategies that we all know need to be put in place if we are to address climate change and the challenges that are facing us. I mean, it's interesting to reflect that we've just gone through yet another very wet winter. And I'm not going to be a prophet, but or a soothsayer, but I can almost guarantee that come about May or June, we'll be saying, where's all that water gone? When's it going to rain again? Because we're desperate. So the needs for how we manage water across our landscapes here in Norfolk, be it the salt marshes or the rivers and the coast, or the Brecklands or the Broads, Each individual area, each region has its own particular challenges. So the logistics for this workshop are going to be set out by Robin Price, who is the Chief Exec of Water Resources East, and he'll tell you that about the Q&A and the chat functions. But I'd like to really welcome Councillor Andrew Jemison, who is the Cabinet Member for Finance and Norfolk County Council, one of our partners in this key event. And welcome to Andrew. I mean, I've known Andrew actually virtually all my life, which is not uncommon in Norfolk, is it? But jolly wonderful that he's here with us this afternoon, taking an interest in what is, I think, a very fundamental and important subject, water. So fundamental for water in Norfolk, because literally we are on the front line of climate change and the challenges that it throws us, and together is something we can really address. So thank you, all of you, for attending, and Andrew, over to you.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Henry. And it's really good to be here. And I agree completely that this is an unbelievably important time to be looking at this issue. I'm speaking to you from the North Norfolk coast up by Brancaster, and the issues at Burnham Market have been very intense for people living there, and indeed still are. We were very pleased at Norfolk County Council to support the Sustainable Water Management Programme and invest via the Norfolk Strategic Fund. Because while cross-sector water management is going to be key to unlocking this county's future economic growth and ensuring as well that our natural environment recovers and flourishes, it is also vital that infrastructure keeps up with development programs across the county and along the coast in particular. So as well as those bodies responsible for ensuring that infrastructure can cope with current and future development, this program will, I believe, increase the resilience of water management for all users, including the agri-tech sector, because the agri-tech sector is a focus for the County Council, because it's will be a key economic growth driver. So the Norfolk Sustainable Water Management Programme is very timely. Henry mentioned that in January, Norfolk County Council set up the Norfolk Flooding Alliance Task Force, chaired by the General Lord Dannatt, and with a total of some 36 entities involved with flood response in some way or another, it was clear that our role as lead local flood authority was ambiguous, to say the least. So I hope that a significant streamlining of decision-making and responsibilities will be one of the results of Lord Dannatt's alliance, and our coordination of the county's flooding resilience with district councils, Anglian Water, the Environment Agency, internal drainage boards, etc., will, I think, become much clearer. So as Henry has said, the irony is not lost on me that the Alliance was focused on flooding, yet in a few months' time, we could all be talking about drought. The need for this programme is therefore clear. In addition, it fits with Norfolk's strategic priorities. We're the 5th largest shire county in England, with a population of nearly 900,000. We're forecast to grow to more than 1 million by 2036. There are plans in train to build more than 80,000 new homes within the next 20 years. And alongside the growing population, we have a buoyant job market. We have high levels of employment. And we're one of the largest county economies with more than 37,000 businesses, 348,000 jobs that are worth about £18 billion. And we're a net contributor to the UK economy. In April 2019, I was very pleased that Norfolk County Council committed to reaching carbon neutrality by 2030. The serious impact around climate change and environmental degradation is compounded by development unless sufficient infrastructure is put in place. The Council is also committed this year to respond to DEFRA's A Green Future, our 25-year environment plan. Improving the environment for over the next generation, creating richer habitats, improve air and water quality, limit plastic pollution, and push modal shifts in behavior, whether it's transport or elsewhere, through public engagement. So I'm really pleased to participate in the formation of a partnership to prepare a sustainable water management plan. I'll be keen to see and hopefully shape the governance around this, and in particular around the establishment of the Water Fund. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Jameson, and thank you very much, Henry, for your fantastic opening words and kicking off our event in the spirit which we will continue, which is around optimism and an enormous sense of ambition. I can just get my neck. And slight IT problems, of course. Okay, I'm just. Okay, so I'm also just sort out my IT. I'm Robin Price, as Henry introduced me. I'm the Managing Director of Water Resources East, and I'm very, very pleased to be here this afternoon. I'd just like to run through very briefly our agenda for today, and then I'd like to take you through just a very brief overview. Some of you may not be familiar with Water Resources East, so just a couple of slides just showing a bit of introduction to Water Resources East and where this very, very important strategy fits in with the overall regional planning process which we are undertaking. So yeah, once I've given you the introduction and shown you how this fits in with WRE, I'll be then handing over to my colleagues Sophie Tremolay and Eustace Rappel from the Nature Conservancy, who are key partners in this program, who are going to introduce the concept of water funds, which is kind of sitting at a collective action mechanism sitting at the heart of this strategic program. We're very delighted then to welcome Philippa Cross from Atkins, who has been very busy over the last month or so. A very short brief for Philippa, but she's done an absolutely fantastic job at talking to many stakeholders across the county, really trying to get a really detailed understanding of the water challenges facing the county of Norfolk. We'll then have some time for some Q&A and then a short break. And then what I'm really excited about now is about one of the real opportunities that will be developed through this program is the opportunity to connect Norfolk into a global family of water security and water fund experts. And I'm absolutely delighted that colleagues from Arizona, from Chesapeake Bay and Columbia will be joining us this afternoon to give us some examples of their experience to bring this to life. This is, look at how water security challenges have been met in faraway countries, far away from Norfolk, but really just to show how close the challenges are and the approach that we're going to take and how well suited it is to this wonderful county. Again, we'll have some more Q&A and then I'll hand over to my colleague Rachel Dyson, our Head of Engagement and Communications at WRE. We'll give you a bit of some of the pre-work that we've done already. We've already started to do some mapping of nature-based projects and things across the county. So again, Rachel will kind of play that back, and then Sophie and I will come back and we'll just tell you what's going to happen next. And then we'll have some closing comments from Steve Moncaster, WRE's Technical Director, and I shall invite Henry back to then close the afternoon. You have to forgive us. This is a kind of a launch event for us. So please forgive us the fact that this is rather a broadcast event. We are going to be giving you a lot of information, but this is the start of kind of an 18-month initial program. We hope this will be the initial program of a much longer, more permanent story for the county. So there are some Q&As. Please keep questions coming. If you wish to pose any questions to any of us as speakers, please use the Q&A function as opposed to the chat. I know we're all very familiar with different kind of ways of putting questions, but if you could focus your questions through the Q&A function button. And there is also the opportunity to vote on questions as well, which for those of us that are chairing sessions just helps us to see which are the most popular questions, and we can help direct our questions and we can answer those as well. So that's the format for the afternoon. The event, I think, is being recorded, so if anybody has any concerns around that, then please do put us a note through either on the chat or the Q&A and let us know if you have any problems. But we are planning to record this because, as with all of these events, this afternoon wasn't convenient for everybody's diary. So although we have over 130 of you on the call, there are others who have been unable to make it. So we will publish this on our website. So thank you very much. Yeah, extend my thanks to everybody for attending. Okay, so very, very brief introduction to Water Resources East for those that aren't familiar, and apologies to those that are familiar who have seen these slides several times. But we are one of the 5 regional water resource planning groups set up under a new Environment Agency national planning framework. This was published February 2020, so a year ago. And this brought into being, essentially gave a mandate to 5 regional water resource planning groups, one in the north, one in the West Country, the southeast, and ourselves in the east. As Henry said, WRE existed from back in 2014, was founded by Anglian Water. But now operates in a slightly different way, which I'll explain in a moment. But we are now working together as 5 regional groups, both to develop a regional plan for each of our regions, but also to then knit those plans together for the first time into a wide, broad water management strategy for the entire country, for the whole of England, involving Wales as well. So that's the exciting challenge for us. And essentially, on paper, as I say the words, they're very easy words to say. All we have to do is understand the future demand for water for each of our regions. And again, the demand drivers for our region, again, being rather simplistic, are broken down into the region's environmental ambition. We know that this region, another region, this county, this region, this country has a very strong environmental ambition. The game in town is not anywhere near, not just about we do some stuff and we protect the environment. Absolutely not. We must restore and enhance the environment. And I've just come straight from a fantastic WWF-led webinar on the Dasgupta review with some very startling comments and thoughts and some quotes, which I commend you to the Dasgupta review if you want to understand the impact on nature that we're having. But the region clearly has a very strong economic ambition as well. This region wants to accommodate more houses, more growth, wants to grow more food, wants to grow more crops, grow more food, wants to contribute to the energy sector, particularly as we move to decarbonize a perhaps hydrogen-based economy. The region also has strong tourism, leisure, well-being ambition as well. And what we are trying to understand is how do we deliver? Well, one thing we realize is we've got to, unless we deliver our environmental ambition, we're not going to make we're certainly not going to make best use of our economic ambition. But how do we bring these together into understanding the future demand? How do we make sure that water isn't a barrier, either too much or not enough, to any of those ambitions? Because the logo at the top, sitting above this, is not a spectre of climate change; it's the here and now impact of a very volatile climate. And once we understand the future demand for water, again, it's around what are the options that we need to deliver to meet that demand. And again, very briefly, a hierarchy of options where, of course, we must focus on water efficiency. We all have to very simply use less water in this part of the world, be that us in our homes, be that businesses, be that farmers, landowners. All of us have to be very efficient with this very, very precious resource. We then want to focus on nature-based solutions, and this is the big focus for this afternoon. How can we harness the power of nature to deliver ecosystem services, to deliver water security and water-related benefits for us? But then also we recognize absolutely we are going to need more infrastructure. We are going to need reservoirs. We are going to need pipelines, transfer systems, the way of moving water around, and potentially new treatment technology as well. But how can all of those be designed in a way that delivers maximum benefits? Gone are the days of just an asset, a piece of water infrastructure, just delivering for one sector, for one purpose, we hope. How do we maximize the use of every asset that we build? The future, the problem we're trying to solve, well, on an average day, 2,311 million litres of water are used in this region, and only 85% of that water is used to make drinking water. If we compare that to London and the southeast, 98% of water taken from the environment is used to make drinking water. And again, of course, no surprise that a vast majority of a huge proportion of that, 15%, is used to irrigate the crops and grow food that the nation absolutely, this region and indeed the nation absolutely depend on. So we have a very different planning problem to our colleagues in other regions, in the fact that we have no reason we can't work without other organizations and other sectors. And looking forward, the future is rather bleak from a water perspective, and Philippa will give us a few more details on this later. But we are predicting currently that we will need an additional somewhere between 530 and 1,650 odd million litres of water additionally per day for this entire region. And the drivers are there: climate change, sustainability, abstractions, the need to enhance, protect, restore and enhance the environment, population growth, decarbonisation, and indeed agricultural growth. So some frightening things there. Firstly, the difference between the upper and lower. We've got a lot of work to do around the data, and we will need all of your help and our region's help. But also the size of those numbers; those are enormous numbers of enormous volumes of water we're going to need to find. But we're doing this. The great news is that we're doing this in partnership. WRE has been set up now for about 18 months as an independent, not-for-profit membership organisation, and I am absolutely delighted that we have nearly over 140 individual members, and hopefully many organisations in the audience. You will see your logos on the screen now, as you are our partners. So what we're going to be doing in this regional plan, as we put a plan in place, we will not be sending this out, right at the end, doing this behind closed doors and then sending it out to you at the end through a traditional consultation exercise. We will be co-creating this plan with you, and the Norfolk water strategy, sustainable water strategy that we'll be developing and talking more this afternoon, will be developed through developed and delivered through co-creation, which I think is the only way that we can do this effectively. Our vision for the region is for Eastern England to have sufficient water resources to support a flourishing economy and the needs of its population. But really, really importantly for this afternoon, we want this region to be seen as an international exemplar of collaborative integrated water resource management. And you'll see some examples internationally in a moment. And we published a business plan last summer and a 7-point strategy, which I will leave you to read at your leisure. Very briefly, my last slide is just showing the wealth of projects and initiatives that we are involved in as Water Resources East. We're a very small team, but we rely on our partners. We rely on collaborations and fantastic partners such as the Nature Conservancy, Anglian Water, and Norfolk County Council to help us deliver many of these projects. So, we are working from the Humber Bank. We have a vast region from the Humber Bank right the way through to the Thames Estuary to the borders of North London and Hertfordshire. But sitting right, and one of the things we are looking at, and one of the things we're looking at exploring, is what is the appropriate scale to do water planning? Where do you get the most impact, and where can you move further fastest? And we are working with individual farmers and landowners on individual and estates, looking at individual planning. What do we get? Absolutely, we are wedded to the catchment-based approach. That is the scientific way of doing things. Water in, water out. That's the boundary in which you should be doing. That's where nature goes. That's where the water flows. But we are very interested in what happens when you scale up to county level, and Norfolk is our first county, is currently our only kind of county-based plan that we are working on. We're also working at landscape scale across the fens, and indeed then scaling up to the region. So this is part of it. We are experimenting on you, good stakeholders of Norfolk, to see, is this, how far can we get when we work on a county basis and focus on economic and environmental ambition and nature-based solutions to solve water security issues. So that's it from me. So I've just skipped ahead to a later slide. Forgive me. I'd really very much like to now hand over to Sophie Tremollet, the Europe Water Sector Director, and to Eustace Rappel, who is the Conservation Finance Lead from the Nature Conservancy. So Sophie and Eustace, thank you very much.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sophie Tremollet. I'm the Europe Water Security Director for the Nature Conservancy. I'm sharing my screen now, going to slideshow. So thanks a lot to Henry, to Councillor, to Robin for the great introduction. As Robin mentioned, we're one of the 4 partners involved in the setting up of the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme. And just for, to give you a little word of introduction, the Nature Conservancy is a large organization working on nature conservation issue with a focus on biodiversity protection, climate adaptation, and climate mitigation. Water is, of course, at the heart of these concerns, and this is the area where I'm focusing my work in England and also in Spain and other parts of Europe. But Norfolk is really our first and very interesting efforts of joining forces here in Europe, given that most of our work has been outside, I would say, in the US and in Latin America. So I just wanted to clarify on what we are doing here. What is the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme? We have 2 main objectives. One is, first of all, to prepare a water resource sustainable management plan that evaluates how nature-based solutions can make a substantial contribution to addressing the water security challenges that Norfolk is facing in a way that is meaningful and can work alongside other strategies such as demand management and infrastructure development. And the idea is that we don't want to stop at the plan. Effectively, we're looking at setting up what we call a collective action platform for implementing the plan, which we will refer to for now as the Norfolk Water Fund. There are 4 core partners. Anglian Water and Norfolk County Council are also involved. And we are pleased to report we signed our collaboration agreement just a few days ago. So, you know, I want to introduce a little bit more about what do we mean by a water fund. These are organizations that have been created with the support of the Nature Conservancy in 43 locations across the globe, which work on creating and enhancing the financial and governance mechanisms so as to unite stakeholders around a common goal to contribute to water security through nature-based solutions and sustainable watershed management. What do we mean by nature-based solutions and water security? This is what is shown on the screen, and it's really looking at how can we invest in actions that can protect and sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems to address challenges effectively and adaptively, whereas providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So that's a bit of a mouthful. That's the official definition, if you want, that the International Union for Conservation of Nature has developed, and we are looking at the specific challenge of water security and how these NBS can be deployed in order to address it. What do we mean in practice? These are sort of a schematic of a watershed, if you want, showing that it is possible to invest in nature to protect watersheds so as to deliver some water security benefits in terms of reducing flood, addressing water scarcity, or minimizing water pollution from agricultural runoff, for example. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with these solutions, which could include riparian restoration, wetlands restoration, wetlands creation, improved agricultural practices, reforestation or afforestation. And to a large extent, many of these solutions are already implemented in areas of Norfolk, and we will show, we have started in drawing up an inventory, if you want, of these initiatives that have adopted this kind of approaches. But what we find, and it's important to stress that the Nature Conservancy is a science-based organization. So what we found through our work across the globe is that it often takes an at-scale implementation of these NBS in order to deliver water security and unlock multiple benefits beyond water security, such as climate change mitigation, adaptation, human health and well-being, biodiversity conservation, or jobs and social cohesion. And it's important to work at landscape scale in order to generate a meaningful and measurable impact, which would make these NBS as investment options comparable and competitive with grey infrastructure or other approaches that have been the norm up to this point. So if we look around, there are examples of where these NBS have been implemented at scale to some extent by beneficiaries of water. So where there are water companies that have been struggling with issues of phosphate or issues of nutrients, and that's the case in England, of course, as you know. They have started working with farmers, for example, to get them to change their agricultural practices. We have example in England, we have example in France. Eau de Paris, for example, is one water company that does that a lot, or with bottled water companies that have to protect their catchment. These are still fairly marginal, I would say, and most of these NBS tend to be funded through public money, largely through agricultural subsidies or other types of grants. And what we are looking to do here is really to build a collective action platform that can serve multiple purposes in order to enable this investment at scale. And these multiple purposes are listed here. What I would say is that the type of collective action that will be retained out of this exercise will have to depend on what is currently done and where the benefits of a collective action mechanism at the scale of Norfolk would come from. So the different functions that can be delivered would include stakeholder engagement, the definition of common objectives across multiple partners, the prioritization, identifying where investing in nature-based solutions can deliver the greatest bang for the buck. And that can only be done through modeling and science-based prioritization. Then it can be useful for joint implementation or coordinated implementation, for funding mobilization to coordinate funding streams and mobilize new ones, including, for example, the mobilization of repayable financing from private investors. We keep hearing that there's a lot of private sector financiers that are interested in investing in natural capital, but in order to do that, they need platforms that enable their funds and repayable funds to be channeled to these projects. And then very importantly, collective action mechanisms can help with monitoring and learning so as to inform the funding mobilization and all these other elements. So water funds are a particular type of collective action platform, which has a particular focus on funding mobilization. And we set those up where we identify that there are downstream users or users in the watershed that have a joint interest in pooling funds together to invest in those NBS at scale. So the funding may come from these users, may come from public funds, but which are channeled in a common pool or coordinated in that pool. So this is what you see here, and you have a lot more information on water funds on the reference here, the Water Funds Toolbox, which is a toolbox maintained by the Nature Conservancy. Because we have set up this type of platform in a number of locations, 41 locations spread across Latin and North America, Africa, Asia, and the one in Norfolk will be our first approach at doing this in Europe and in the UK, of course. So I think that was an aspect that was of interest to the Norfolk County Council, which is the fact that through joining this effort with the Nature Conservancy, we can pull in experience from multiple locations across the world. We can join the water fund network, and that can therefore increase attractiveness for domestic and international funders of the projects. And it can also serve as an example for other work either undertaken by WRE in the region or in other parts of the UK or elsewhere in Europe. So I will leave you there to Justice, who can take you through the steps of setting up a water fund and what we're looking to do here. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. And thanks for all of your time today. It's really exciting to be here. As Sophie mentioned, there's 41 water funds so far, and this is potentially the first one in Europe. My role at Nature Conservancy is a global one, and I get to see what's working over here and try to take those best practices and share in other places. So I'm as much looking forward to helping out to Norfolk as much as learning from Norfolk in this case. So I've been asked to go through what the steps are to set up a water fund. And just as a brief reminder, the core competencies of a water fund are linking downstream beneficiaries to upstream interventions, so getting people to pay for things because they're going to receive benefits from those NBS. The second one is harnessing collective action, because we've found that by stacking those beneficiaries, the ROI can go through the roof, but unstacked, it oftentimes doesn't work. So it really requires both collective action on the beneficiary side as well as the actual implementation of actions, because there's a lot of different folks that are required to actually do the work. And so getting everyone to work together on both of those aspects is key. And then the third core aspect is linking all of that together into a defined set of objectives, both in terms of water security as well as the actual conservation portfolio, so that there's a clear North Star that everyone's going for. And so the development lifecycle phases are all about taking this very wide container of possibilities and narrowing it down to what is it that we want to do that is realistic based on the funding available. Next slide. So the first phase is eligibility. This is the, what is the opportunity? The key things here are, first of all, what's the water security challenge in Norfolk? There's a bunch of things that come to mind: groundwater issues, water quality issues, flooding issues. Each one of those actually then needs to be linked to what are the nature-based solutions that are available at scale. In that portfolio of 41 water funds, where there's water stressors, sometimes that's the invasives, but that's not the case in Norfolk. But sometimes it's the case that large reforestation needs to happen for groundwater infiltration. Like, which specific NBS will address that challenge is something that needs to be thoughtfully considered. The next one on that list, and this is something again for Norfolk to consider, is it the utility that is the primary beneficiary that will care about this? Is it an irrigation district? Is it a set of agricultural or corporate interests? Bottling plants, for example, are very common in our water funds. Which one of those parties really wants to be part of this collective action platform? And then key to this as well is the water fund's goal is not to duplicate. There's usually a host of already good partners in the field that are doing good work that can be scaled up. And so it's both observing what's working right now, and what is the overall need, what's that gap, and how do we get there? Next. In terms of feasibility, the question then moves to what do we specifically want to do? There's usually an implementation objective that's hypothesized in eligibility, and then the feasibility is, okay, now if we want to realize that at-scale implementation that Sophie was talking about, what does that specifically mean? These things are usually formulated in 20,000 hectares per year for 10 years type of thing. They're big, they're bold, but they're also backed up by a realistic sense of the funding of what would actually go to drive that. Importantly, sometimes during feasibility, there are specific downstream beneficiaries that demand a certain burden of proof to say they'll invest. For example, water utilities are bound by least costs. So the NBS sometimes needs to be shown that it is a cost-effective alternative relative to other investments. And so that's the biophysical modeling that Sophie was mentioning sometimes occurs there. Next. Design is then moving to the question, how will it happen? And so we tend to see that water funds can take a variety of legal forms. It can be an umbrella partnership that is, an MOU. It can be a specific legal vehicle. There's a bunch of different permutations and combinations, but the question is, what's the most efficient way to get the work done that enables all the partners to work together? And so that needs to be individually considered. Also, the question of what are the full life cycle of resources to not just do the implementation, but also any monitoring and evaluation and sort of running the program. Those are also considered during design. And then the last phase that we'll go through today is creation, which is nuts and bolts sort of blocking and tackling. It's questions like, what are the internal HR processes, and what are the permits that need to be secured, and what's the first year operating plan? So we've moved from the very high level and many degrees of freedom to we have 1 degree free, or we have one specific thing we want to do, and what are the immediate next steps that need to occur to get there. Next. So this is a lot of text on this on this diagram, but all that to say that there's certain activities that are associated with each of these phases, and that importantly, there's been a lot of good work already that has addressed some or much of various activities. So we're going to be learning from those existing efforts. And also there is a variety of studies that are either currently underway, wrapping up, or going to be commissioned shortly that'll be infilling, especially for this sort of eligibility and feasibility activity phases. Next. So just a quick summary in terms of the immediate top questions on Robin's mind as we start embarking on this journey. The key aspect of water funds is nature-based solutions. So what are the water security challenges relative to Norfolk's water assets? which could be served from a enhancement in ecosystem services provided by nature-based solutions. Where and which of those nature-based solutions are going to be harnessed because they're deemed cost-effective and relevant. And then on the collective action side, learning from existing parties in the field as to what works and how and what could be improved, and getting a strong forward momentum together. And then the last one, and very important, is which of those downstream beneficiaries really cares about that specific water security concern and is interested in potentially funding that NBS, and what's the burden of proof required to get there. And very lastly, if there is a need and potential for leveraging repayable finance to further accelerate outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eustace and Sophie. As I mentioned, so we kind of wanted to throw you straight into what is a water fund this afternoon. But let's come back to Norfolk for the next 20 minutes or so. I'm really grateful for the work that Philippa Cross has done through Atkins, just to really, as I say, to interview a number of stakeholders across the county, and really if we can just spend the next 20 minutes just really understanding a perspective on the water management issues that Philippa has picked up in her conversations with you. So thank you, Philippa. I think you're muted, Philippa.
Hi, everyone. I think that's working now. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to so many of you today on the topic of water management issues and opportunities for the County of Norfolk. I'm Philippa Cross, and I'm an environmental scientist at Atkins, based in our water management team in Birmingham. And I'm also joined today by my colleague, Stuart Smith, an associate director at Atkins, based in our water management team in Peterborough. The aim of this presentation is to present the key water-related challenges that currently affect and are projected to affect stakeholders in Norfolk over the period to 2050. First, I'll briefly introduce Atkins's involvement with the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme, and I'll then provide an overview of the key water assets in Norfolk, present the 4 key water-related challenges identified through our work, and highlight the main pressures which are likely to exacerbate these challenges. And finally, I'll just touch on opportunities for nature-based solutions in Norfolk before providing a brief summary. So Atkins was commissioned by Water Resources East to identify the key water-related challenges that currently affect and are projected to affect key stakeholders, including the environment in Norfolk over the period to 2050. At the project outset, it was assumed that these are likely to include challenges related to water availability, water quality, and flooding. And with respect to flooding, the scope excludes coastal flooding. The findings presented are based on a high-level review of readily available documents and information gathered through stakeholder interviews. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank stakeholders for their participation in those interviews. 4 management catchments primarily fall within the county boundary. The Broadland Rivers catchment, shown in red on the map, the Northwest Norfolk catchment, shown in yellow, the North Norfolk catchment, shown in green, and the Camanilli Hughes catchment, shown in purple. The map shows that the Broadland Rivers catchment approximately covers 2/3 of the county, and that most of the rivers start and end within the county boundary. 71% of the county is covered by arable farmland, and the largest settlements include the city of Norwich and the seaside town of Great Yarmouth. It's important to note that there are a number of internal drainage boards and catchment partnerships operating across the county. Norfolk is underlain by 2 aquifers, the chalk shown on the map on the right in lime green, and the crag shown in light brown. The chalk forms the most important groundwater resource in East Anglia, while the crag is a locally important resource in Norfolk. The surface water groundwater interaction of both aquifers at outcrop is responsible for the maintenance of flows in locally and nationally important wetland systems. Norfolk is home to 12 chalk rivers, which are principally fed by the chalk. Their waters are highly alkaline, which gives rise to a distinctive ecology and range of plants and animals. Norfolk is particularly rich in wetland heritage, supporting reed beds, grazing marsh and fen habitat, the latter of which is a very rare habitat in Europe. And reed beds in Norfolk and Suffolk as well are the UK stronghold of the bittern, one of our rarest breeding birds. And reed beds and fens also support other species such as rare moths, swallowtail butterflies and other insects, water voles and otters. The Broads is Britain's largest nationally protected wetland and third largest inland waterway with 200 kilometres of navigable waterways. So it's easy to see how it attracts over 7 million visitors a year. And at this point, it's probably good to introduce the fact that tourism is the largest sector industry in the county, contributing about £3 billion to the local economy. 4 key water-related challenges were identified in Norfolk: water availability, water quality, physical modifications, and flooding. Competing demands in the county exist between water needs for public water supply, irrigated agriculture, and the environment. And as a result, there's little surplus water available. Anglian Water's Water Resources Management Plan 2019 shows that all water resource zones in Norfolk, with the exception of 3, have a shortfall in supplies by the end of the decade. And South Fenland Water Resource Zone has the greatest shortfall in supplies by 2050 of -20 megalitres per day. Deficits in all water resource zones, with the exception of South Fenland, are driven by population growth and sustainability reductions. In South Fenland, the shortfall is driven by sustainability reductions and drought resilience. Norfolk is an important county for food production, particularly wheat, barley and sugar beet. And the map on the right shows that Norfolk is an irrigation hotspot, and future water-related needs of the agricultural sector in Norfolk are likely to be significant, driven by growth in irrigated agriculture. It's also important to note that the holiday resorts of the coastal and Broads regions undergo significant population expansions in summer. So the seasonally high summer demand placed upon water resources coincides with the greatest demand requirements from the agricultural sector. Surface water and groundwater quality is a key issue in Norfolk. The most recent cycle of Water Framework Directive assessment shows that few surface water bodies currently meet good status, shown on the map on the left in green. The majority are of moderate status, shown in yellow, and all but one groundwater body in Norfolk is of poor status, which is shown on the map on the right in blue. Arable farmland in Norfolk is often farmed intensively, which is a cause for concern when managed ineffectively. Agrochemicals can percolate through the ground and contaminate groundwater reserves. In addition, pollutants are carried off farmland during various diffuse processes where they eventually enter watercourses. And these pollutants can degrade the quality and promote the quality of water, and promote eutrophication. And furthermore, sediment loading can result in turbid waters and can cause smothering of spawning areas for fish. Roads and urban infrastructure provide another source of pollution. For example, discharges from water recycling centres, of which Norfolk has 247, can contain pollutants such as ammonia and phosphate. Over the centuries, most Norfolk rivers were modified to make way for agriculture and industry. This land use change has led to the decline in the quality and resilience of aquatic habitats. For example, rivers are silted, disconnected from floodplains, and lack morphological features for wildlife. And furthermore, barriers to fish and change to riparian habitats has also had negative impacts. Over the past 6 years, Norfolk has experienced regular intense rainfall events, which have caused widespread flooding, severely impacting local communities, key services and transport links. The most significant recent event, which Robin mentioned earlier, occurred on the night of the 23rd and 24th of December last year. Prolonged rainfall caused widespread flooding and disruption in Norfolk, and some areas receiving over 50 millimetres of rain in just 24 hours. Based on national surface water modelling, approximately 37,000 properties in Norfolk are estimated to be at risk from flooding, and Norfolk was recognised as the 10th most at-risk area out of 152 authorities in England. The Norfolk Strategic Flood Alliance has set out to revisit Norfolk's flood risk management strategy and to strengthen partnership working amongst the many organisations with responsibilities for flood risk management in Norfolk. I'd just like to briefly touch on some of the main pressures which are likely to exacerbate the 4 water challenges presented. First being climate change. So analysis undertaken by University of East Anglia to examine recent changes in temperature and precipitation generally show an increase in indicators of higher summer temperatures, a reduction in those for colder winter temperatures and greater rainfall intensity. The maps on the right, for example, show an increase in mean summer temperatures of at least 0.5 degrees between the 2 baseline periods. And the UK climate projections 2018 show that the UK is likely to experience hotter, drier summers, warmer, wetter winters, and an increase in the magnitude and frequency of extreme weather events. Anglian Water's Water Resources Management Plan 2019 indicates that the majority of water resource zones in Norfolk are not vulnerable to climate change, with the exception of Norwich and the Broads. Secondly, droughts. There have been a number of droughts that have affected the Anglian region, for example, in 1975-76 and 2011-12. The figure on the right, taken from Anglian Water's Water Resources Management Plan 2019, shows that the majority of water resource zones in the county are not vulnerable to drought. However, South Fenland Water Resource Zone, shown in purple, is impacted by severe drought, while North Fenland Water Resource Zone, which is hatched on the map, is vulnerable to severe drought. According to the Met Office, while dry spells in the UK are getting shorter, this is not an indication of changing levels of drought in the UK. And the UK climate projections 2018 projected a trend towards drier summers on average, with generally stronger drying in southern parts of the UK. And this could have implications for water availability, water quality, and flooding in Norfolk. Extended periods of extreme winter rainfall are now 7 times more likely, according to the Met Office. and the intensity of rainfall is expected to increase in future summers. This suggests that summers may tend to become drier overall, but when it does rain, it will fall in heavier bursts, which could have implications for flash flooding in Norfolk. The population of Norfolk is forecast to increase by about 10% by 2041. The red area on the map shows that between 20 and 34,000 new dwellings are planned in Greater Norwich by 2036, where most dwellings currently exist in Norfolk. Growth often coincides with areas where water and water recycling services are already under pressure and environmental resilience is low. For example, where rivers are at or close to limits of environmental capacity for effluent discharge, or where there are elevated risks of flooding, and where catchments are over licensed or over abstracted for water resources. The agriculture, food and drink sector in Norfolk and Suffolk generates about 3.6 billion per year, and there is a growing interest in UK food and drink products overseas, and the sector is taking an increasingly international outlook, and so continued growth in this sector is likely to have significant water requirements. And finally, I just wanted to touch very briefly on the subject of shifting environmental expectations. The accelerating impact of climate change is of growing public concern, as are other environmental issues such as biodiversity loss. During the first COVID-19 lockdown, people reported the benefits nature in their local area had provided them during this difficult time, and as a result, the public and customers are increasingly calling for higher levels of environmental ambition. And this is also reflected by government. For example, the Environment Bill republished last year introduces a mandatory requirement for biodiversity net gain in the planning system, and it also introduces provisions for requiring the development of local nature recovery strategies across England. So yeah, just touching on opportunities, going back to Sophie's original slide, that investing in nature-based solutions in Norfolk has the potential to help address the key water-related challenges in Norfolk, as well as generate multiple co-benefits such as those outlined in the figure. For example, creation of something like wetlands at scale has the potential to provide landscapes with new wildlife, helping to achieve biodiversity targets, provide places for people to visit, and help protect people and farmland from flooding by absorbing and retaining rainfall. So in summary, the key water-related challenges identified in Norfolk covered water availability, water quality, physical modifications, and flooding. These are likely to be exacerbated by environmental and socio-economic pressures such as climate change and growth, and that nature-based solutions can help address water-related challenges in Norfolk and generate multiple co-benefits. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I've kept to time, and yeah, look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much indeed, Philippa. An incredibly comprehensive piece of work, crikey. I think you've just illustrated to us all, as if we didn't need reminding, the complexity of the issues across Norfolk and the delicate interplay between a number of them, which is, yeah, so that's what we're here to hopefully work our way through and sort out and move forward on. So there are a couple of questions. I just wonder if Sophie would be happy to turn her camera and join Philippa, and perhaps Eustace as well, please. Just a couple of questions in the thing. My fellow panelists have been answering the best questions live, so I will ask them again. But here's a good one just to start us off. To come to you, Philippa, the term drought, question from Jeff Brighty, just the definition of drought. You obviously used Anglian Water's water resource management plan, looking at kind of drought from a public water supply perspective. But clearly there are different definitions, you know, public water supply drought, environmental drought, prolonged dry weather. Could you just clarify kind of your definition, your understanding of the term drought for a Norfolk context, please?
Yeah, so that particular overview that I provided was from a water company public water supply planning perspective. So that was I think a 1 in 200 year drought event. So yeah, it will be worth us just, I guess, having a look at the various definitions across the different sectors to understand that level of risk for different sectors within Norfolk.
Wonderful, thank you. A couple of points of clarification from Sean around there are actually no rivers in Norfolk that achieve good surface water status or overall environmental health. Some comments from David Thomas around criteria, you know, around should we be striving for good ecological potential as a more realistic and fairer test. And these are sort of things that we'll be discussing, and Sophie and I will talk a bit later about the kind of how we're going to use this group and some smaller subgroups just to focus on some of these. Just a question from, or a note from Andrew Alston, representing the agricultural sector, about just a suggestion. I'm sure you weren't suggesting that the kind of pollution was mainly a farming issue. I'm sure there's an acknowledgement there are many sources of pollution and water quality damage. Yeah, I guess Philippa, that there was no that is the only source, but you know there is a source there and an opportunity to work with landowners and farmers around that. Really good question, which Sophie went and answered, which I thought was great. I thought it'd be really good to hear again. It's just a definition of nature-based solutions, Sophie. I think that'd be a good one, just to remind us of keep you telling us what your definition of nature-based solutions, please.
Right. So I think the question was with respect to some specific examples, and what we tend to do, and we're looking at nature-based solutions that focus on or that can contribute to water security. Of course, there's other types of nature-based solutions that could contribute to other challenges, such as for coastal resilience, for example, or for carbon sequestration. But in this case, we're really looking at which nature-based solutions can enhance water security, and we classify them in 4 categories. One would be protection, so targeted habitat protection, for example, targeted forest protection in areas where they're at risk of being developed and therefore to generate further degradation. Or it could be restoration of existing landscapes which have been degraded and which can no longer provide the ecosystem services that natural landscapes can provide. So that would include riparian restoration, restoring riverbanks, both for habitats, but also to limit the amount of sediment and nutrients that might flush into the rivers. Wetland restoration. We know that large quantity of wetlands have been degraded. We've been losing wetland habitats, and in doing so, we losing the ability to retain water and to filter water. So just restoring wetlands can be a good option. Then we would have what consists of management practices. So that's where improved agricultural management practices would fall into, such as planting cover crops, for example, again, in order to limit sediments and nutrients flooding into the water. Improve forestry practices, that maybe for reducing fire risk, for example. That's, that might not be the case in Norfolk, but in other places where we work, when there are catastrophic fires, such as in California, for example, that would create a lot of sediments running into the river and stopping the ability to provide water. So therefore, improved forestry practices would help. And the last category would include created habitats. So when we invest in a constructed wetland or retention basin, or creating completely new forests, planting trees in order to again protect the environment and boost its ability to deliver ecosystem services. So that's just a run through, but as Justus was saying, one of the first exercises in this plan will be to identify which of these large menu of NBS would have the greatest potential to make a difference for the water security challenges on which this initiative seeks to focus. It may be that we can't cover everything due to lack of resources, but we will have to identify what is likely to make the greatest difference.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Question for you, if I may, Eustace. Just a question from Alex Adam from the Rivers Trust. And again, I don't want to steal any of Mark or Brooke's thunder in a moment, but just paint a very brief picture for us, Eustace, if you could, of the potential primary buyers of potential ecosystem services. So in your experience, what sort of organizations buy ecosystem services through this process?
Sure. So traditional members of water funds that we see in multiple places occurring are one, importantly, leveraging existing efforts. So oftentimes there is existing public agencies. So for example, our Rio Grande Water Fund in New Mexico focuses on forest thinning to avoid catastrophic wildfires because that causes massive sedimentation and causes treatment losses. The majority of the funding for that is a bunch of existing public agencies that manage the forest and decided to chip in additional money, right? So public agencies that have an existing sort of natural resources remit and focusing that funding is a big potential driver. The second one that occurs repeatedly is sort of water supply managers. So it often means talking to the regulator and or utility and expressing to them why the specific NVS is relevant to their water infrastructure works. That's something that is quite traditional. Third, over and over again, is sort of corporate water users. And this might be both from a direct risk perspective, like they have an intake that is specifically at risk, or it might be more from a CSR perspective where there's sort of offset credits. We're seeing a lot of that kind of activity. Sometimes there's hydropower operations that require some kind of reservoir management. So those are some of the ones that we see over and over again. Also, irrigation boards tend to crop up. Sophie, anything else come to mind? You'll get there.
Sorry, yeah, I think also from corporate users across their value chain. So for example, buyers of particular products, buyers of beetroot in the case of Norfolk might be interested for their corporate social responsibility, but also to achieve sustainability targets that they set themselves. They want to buy these ecosystem services. And then I would say that, yes, that's at the core of the water fund model, but also complementary to that, we find that there's public agencies that are willing to pay and to contribute, not because they're direct beneficiaries, but because they need to meet targets in terms of regulation and in terms of environmental outcomes that do need to be met. So they find that pooling funding through these kind of mechanisms might be a more cost-efficient way of getting there, rather than delivering multiple grants to multiple beneficiaries. So that would be the case in sort of farming support. For example, they could put money into a fund that is then takes on the administrative responsibility to and the prioritization exercise of distributing those grants. Of course, it needs to fit with the right legal environment and design. So that's one of the phases that we will go through now, is to identify which of the existing funding streams could be pulled and which are the ones that cannot, but there can be support to applying for this funding that can be provided to individual applicants for funding, for example.
Just on that last part, because I think it might be relevant, regulatory drivers for investment are sometimes quite material, because I'll give you a really brief example. In our Brandywine Christina Water Fund in Delaware, there's a bunch of municipalities that have a legal obligation in order to discharge into the river to maintain a certain level of water quality. Well, it turns out that the water quality is happening far upstream from a totally different set of actors. And in order to conduct the on-farm improvements, it's really difficult for the municipalities to directly invest in that, but they can do so via the water fund structure. So solving a jurisdictional gap to address a regulatory concern is also sometimes quite meaningful.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you very much, both. The questions coming out, I'd like to just hold off till after we've heard from Brooke, Mark, and colleagues is how are you planning to get private funders involved willingly? A question from Sarah Love. So I wonder, so if we could just park that for after the Q&A, after we've heard some examples about just, how easy is this? Realistically, how easy is this to get people to kind of to fund? Eustace is smiling, which means I suspect I know the answer. But it'd be great if we could just explore that a little bit in the Q&A after that. Great question from David Baxter around, is it envisaged that parish councils will play a role, particularly in downstream user engagement? And just to echo kind of Henry's kind of opening, I'm really, we're blown away by the engagement from parish councils this afternoon. Thanks to John Pennell and colleagues for kind of mobilising many parish councils this afternoon. Parishes are going to be crucial for us, and I think both in terms of downstream users, if we can protect parishes from flood risk, if we can improve the health of rivers through parishes, that'll be fantastic as kind of downstream users, but also as upstream deliverers of ecosystem services as well. So through very interesting kind of parish plans. I live in a village. I'm down in Cambridgeshire. I was involved in our development of our parish plan, and the way that parish plans and the way parishes are managed and interaction is also a deliverer of ecosystem services. So I think parishes and communities are going to be really, really crucial for us. And again, thank you very much for so many of you for giving your time this afternoon. Thank you. And just one very brief one from David Diggins, just around, in terms of kind of bringing, does WRA have authority to raise local funds? Again, I think Steve may mention this kind of when we close. This is around, leveraging, what are the opportunities to leverage local funds and, money from within the county, from either upstream providers or downstream beneficiaries. But really importantly here, this is also about bringing new money into the county and bringing other opportunities to invest and outside investment into the county as well. So, and that's the sweet spot. That's the magic moment that we are hoping to achieve through this process. So we are up to 22:04. So I'd really like to thank Philippa very much for a fantastically comprehensive piece of work, and we'll chat to you next week about kind of the next stages. There are a lot of questions and I think this has sparked a number of kind of questions and some questions about the data and some which is great, exactly what we needed. This was an initial presentation of the data to see how the county reacted to what you'd laid before them. So thank you very much for that. We'll continue that dialogue. Thank you, Sophie and Eustace, for getting us off to a great start in terms of introducing water funds and what this is all about. When we come back, I'll be handing over to Sophie to chair the next session, and we shall hear some international case studies, and then we'll go back into another question and answer session. There's another question from Jeff to Eustace around return on investment and things. Again, perhaps Sophie, if we could pick that up in the Q&A after that as well. But let's take a break. Let's go get a cup of tea, and then let's come back or a coffee, and then come back in 10 minutes or so at just after 10:02, and let's hear some international cases. So let's hear some real life examples of where this has been done around the world. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So I think I hope you had a good break. We had about 10 minutes, so we're about to start the next session. So we thought that for this next session, as Robin described, we would take you on a tour of selected water funds or other collective action platforms in which TNC has been involved in one way or another, in order to give you examples of the diversity that exists, both in terms of water security challenges that are being addressed, the types of nature-based solutions, and the type of governance arrangements. So for this session, we will have presentations which have been pre-recorded from 3 of my TNC colleagues. The first one will be Brooke Bushman, who's the Arizona Water Project Coordinator, who will tell us about 3 nested collaborative action platform for focused on water scarcity in particular. We will then hear from Mark Breyer, who's the director of a Chesapeake Bay program, which is working with farmers in order to address water quality issues. And we will hear about the very interesting Chesapeake Bay program, which has been in place since 1987, that has delivered substantial results in terms of reducing the nutrient load in the estuary, which is so critical to the US economy. And then we'll move to Colombia with Felipe Guerrero, who's the director of Cuenca Verde, that means green catchment in Spanish, which is a water fund set up with support from TNC back in 2010, but which has been led also very effectively, the development of which has been led by EPM, which is the water company for Medellin, Empresa Pública de Medellin. So we'll hear from each of them in turn, and then we'll open for questions. Unfortunately, Mark won't be able to join us for the Q&A, but both Brooke and Felipe will be there. So Kirsty, over to you if you want to launch the presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Brooke Bushman. I am the Arizona Water Projects Coordinator for the Nature Conservancy here in Arizona in the United States. Today, I'll be talking about 3 collective action platforms in the Upper San Pedro River Basin in Arizona. I'm hoping these platforms will provide insights and ideas as you form your own Norfolk water management plan. Current and future water issues facing the Southwest United States include drought and groundwater depletion. Shown here in the green circle is where I'm located in southeastern Arizona, and also where the San Pedro River Basin is located. The specific water security challenge of this region is that half of the San Pedro Basin's annual precipitation has historically arrived during summer monsoons, recharging the aquifers that feed the San Pedro River through the mountain fronts, ephemeral channels, and floodplains. Zooming in to the Colorado River Basin here, you can see the San Pedro River, shown in the red box at the left, is actually part of the Colorado River Basin. And then zoomed in on the right shows more specifically the area that I'll be talking about today. And the current and future water needs of this area revolve around 3 community needs. One being Fort Huachuca, shown in the green circle. Fort Huachuca is the US Army's premier communications and intelligence testing facility, which generates a bulk of the southeastern Arizona economy. And shown in the pink rectangle at the right is the San Pedro Riparian National Conservation Area, which is managed by the federal agency, the Bureau of Land Management, and protects 50 miles of the groundwater-dependent San Pedro River and its adjacent habitat. This particular river is a migratory byway of hemispheric importance for many migratory birds, as well as important for local wildlife. Also scattered throughout the basin are rural and urban communities of Cochise County. The water challenge of the San Pedro Basin is balancing the water needs for people and nature. These Army installations, ecosystems, and human communities depend on one shared source of groundwater for all of their water needs. So our story revolves around 3 collective action platforms that have been in existence for the past 25 years. They are 3 congressionally recognized partnerships. They include, in total, 44 members scattered through the 3 different partnerships I'll be talking about today. I really like the term collective action platform. It's not a term we've used, but I really enjoy it as a term. I'm going to be talking first about the Upper San Pedro Partnership, or the USPP. Includes 21 members, and this group produces and disseminates the hydrologic science. The Fort Huachuca Sentinel Landscape includes 32 members and leverages landscape scale conservation efforts. The Cochise Conservation and Recharge Network, or the CCRN, is a much smaller 6-member group and is more agile and nimble to actually work together to implement groundwater management projects on the ground. Each of these groups are organized under a memorandum of understanding. One member, a local city, serves as fiscal agent for both the CCRN and USPP. And the Nature Conservancy is involved in each of these partnerships and in many cases served as one of the founding members. Now, I don't intend for you to read all of these. I encourage you not to try. However, I just want to illustrate the types of organizations that are involved in these partnerships. And as I looked at those that are involved in Norfolk, I noticed that many similar sectors are engaged. I do want to make note that the agricultural focus here in southeastern Arizona is dry land ranching, or at least in the basin of interest today. But additionally, we have a military installation, as I mentioned, which is the Department of Defense. We also have home builders and numerous state and federal land and water agencies. Because of their interrelated interests and missions, many of those entities participate in multiple of these 3 groups. Next, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the 3 collective action platforms, their missions and outputs in terms of the scientific data, landscape scale funding, and projects needed to address our water challenges. In terms of scientific data, research, monitoring, and modeling, the Upper San Pedro Partnership really provides this need for the area. This group coordinates and cooperates in the identification, development, and utilization of science and technical information to assist in meeting the water needs of the Upper San Pedro Basin. I want to note that this includes collectively funding the science, oftentimes through that fiscal agent. This group was formed in 1998 and has evolved through the decades based on the changing needs and funding paradigms. The current year budget is $500,000 US, and these funds are used primarily to fund monitoring and studies, which I'm going to highlight 3 of those keystone reports next. In terms of research, one report the partnership has produced details the ecosystem health and water needs of the basin. This report established the needs of the riparian system in terms of the groundwater thresholds needed to sustain certain riparian communities. In terms of monitoring, this report established a regional hydrologic framework that is the framework for the 14 types of data that we need to continuously monitor in order to balance water for people and nature in terms of groundwater, the riparian system, springs, and river flow. This framework is then used to prioritize and fund ongoing monitoring needs to support the projects and guide policy and planning actions. This framework is currently being transformed from a paper publication into a data web portal that'll launch in early 2022. In terms of modeling, in 2006, the partnership published the predictive groundwater model. And this regional groundwater model points us to the ideal sites for water management. We can run scenarios with this model, and it can also help us understand how long it would take to see the benefits of enhanced flow in the river based on certain management actions. In terms of landscape scale funding and implementation, the Fort Huachuca Sentinel Landscape really focuses on this. This group was formed in 2015 and is led by the U.S. Departments of Agriculture, Defense, and Interior. And their mission collectively, again, this includes the 32 members, is to preserve the rural and working character of the landscape, strengthen the economics of farms, ranches, and forests, conserve habitats and natural resources, and protect vital training missions on Fort Huachuca. I did look up their most recent financials, and as of 2019, this group has leveraged $6 million US between all partners towards this mission. I'm going to spend most of my time on this group, the Cochise Conservation and Recharge Network. And again, they implement water management resource strategies. This is the area where most of my day job focuses. But the CCRN was formed in 2015, is guided by a roadmap plan that is updated every 5 years. The partners include 2 cities, 1 county, 1 agricultural organization, 1 NGO, the Nature Conservancy, and pending inclusion of Fort Huachuca as well. Each of these groups played or continues to play a role in acquiring or managing the CCRN's 8 sites, which are shown here in green on either side of the Sprinka, shown in blue. In terms of water conservation, each of these 8 sites are located in areas where groundwater abstraction would have or was directly affecting the river. Conservation easements have been placed on CCRN sites so that no additional large-scale groundwater abstraction is permitted, but while also enabling ranching to continue. Groundwater recharge projects are then placed on these sites where the groundwater model and studies indicate they're feasible, and these are nature-based solutions to restore the connection between groundwater and the San Pedro River flows. Source water for the projects include accelerated stormwater from impaired landscapes or urbanized impervious surfaces, or treated wastewater. We have 3 groundwater recharge projects operational and 3 more in the planning phases. The CCRN also leverages members' fundraising and outreach capacity. So far, the CCRN members have leveraged $31 million US towards projects, which includes not only the land acquisition, but hydrologic studies and implementation with infrastructure, as well as $150,000 annually US for monitoring activities. I understand that flooding is of particular interest to your area, so I want to highlight this project, the Palominas Flood Control and Stormwater Recharge Project, which was one of our first pilot projects. This project is a nature-based solution approach that delivers multiple benefits. This project channels floodwaters away from an adjacent school that was experiencing severe flooding issues and detains that water in a 10-acre basin and slowly metering it out downstream to these 13 recharge cells shown here on the upper left. Within several of the cells, we are testing various recharge technologies. This project replicates natural groundwater recharge processes that contribute groundwater base flow to an imperiled section of the San Pedro River, shown in the bottom right. The monitoring from this site shows that we've been raising groundwater levels seasonally, we've been controlling nearby flooding, and also the groundwater model was used to predict that 23% of San Pedro River flow increases might be observable by 2015, when this project is coupled with 2 other nearby CCRN projects. So I wanted to thank you for letting me share with you today. I've included the 3 websites for the various partnerships at the bottom here, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thanks a lot, Brooke. So as I mentioned in the introduction, Brooke is with us online. So if you have questions for her on what she's just presented, please type them in the Q&A and we will be able to raise them with her. The next presentation is from Mark Breyer from the Chesapeake Bay program. So Kirst, if you could pull that out on the screen, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Breyer. I'm with the Nature Conservancy, and I'm happy to spend some time with you this afternoon to talk a little bit about the Chesapeake Bay. We only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to give you a quick tour of some experiences we've had here in North America's largest estuary. So let me go ahead and share my screen and just take you on a quick tour of some of the lessons that we've learned here working in the Chesapeake Bay. So just a little context for you. The Chesapeake Bay, again, is North America's largest estuary. It sits in the northeastern part of the United States. It drains portions of 6 U.S. states. Within a decade, probably 20 million people live here. It's quite populated. And thousands of miles of shoreline and rivers and streams. It is also a very important place ecologically and economically. Despite some of the health challenges that I'll share in a few minutes, it still produces an incredible amount of seafood. It's an important place for migratory species along the Atlantic seaboard. It's quite a diverse place in terms of biology. It's also an anchor for much of the economy of the mid-Atlantic United States. And it is part of our identity for those who live in this region culturally. So an incredibly important place for a lot of different reasons. Hundreds of years ago, it was quite a different place than it is today, of course. The water was much, much clearer. That gave rise to a different ecological setting. And one that was that probably produced a lot more seafood and certainly had a lot more diversity associated with it. But of course, like anywhere, things change over time. And so today we have, as I mentioned, many people living here. These are examples of capitals. The Washington, D.C. is in our watershed, along with state capitals in this watershed. Fishing is a significant part of what we do in the Chesapeake Bay. Urban areas, suburban areas are also an important component, as is agriculture. So forests are still the dominant land use, about 65%, but agriculture is actually the largest human use, land use at about 30 or 35%. And here's just a few images of what agriculture looks like in the Chesapeake. These are actually chicken farms here, these long buildings. We also have extensive tidal marshes around the Chesapeake Bay that are important for waterfowl and for fisheries. And recreation is an important part of our culture and of activities along the Chesapeake. But again, it's not what it used to be. And so why is that? A number of factors. I'm going to focus on one, but just to give you a quick tour, we have a few centuries of habitat loss and overfishing. These are actually people standing on oyster shell piles. We have a current and growing threat in climate change impacts, particularly in sea level rise. Much of the fringes of the Chesapeake are quite low, so the areas in red on the map to the left here are going to be underwater in the next 50 years or so. So we are working very hard to ameliorate that and recognize it's quite a challenge for us moving into the future. But actually what I want to focus on most here is water quality, degraded water quality, affecting the health of the Chesapeake quite significantly. This is a satellite image after a large rainstorm, and you can see the sediment plume extending from the northern end of the Chesapeake midway all the way down through the bay. And with that come a number of different impacts, large-scale algal blooms that rob the Chesapeake of water, of oxygen, excuse me. That leads then to fish kills and large economic impacts as well as human health impacts. Of course, this is not an issue that is existent just in the Chesapeake. It exists all over the planet. In fact, it looks like the UK here, these are areas of eutrophication and hypoxia. It looks like the UK is completely covered. My apologies. But the good news is here in the Chesapeake, at least, is the water's actually getting cleaner. And I want to use my remaining time to tell a story about how that came to be, and hopefully some lessons for you all in Norfolk to gain from that. How could we go from a system that was quite degraded a number of years back to one that at least is improving? It's not certainly where we want it to be. For me, how I think about it is perhaps 3 factors and figures. First, I just want to show you sort of what led to this clean water. It's quite simply a reduction in nitrogen going into the Chesapeake. On the left, a bar graph here from 1985, over 300 million pounds. Here we are in the late 20th late 2017, 2020s, we're down below 250 million. So we've made some pretty significant reductions, and that's the rationale. That's why we're seeing clean water. Again, we want to get down to this level here, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But again, my 3 points here that I want to make about why we're making this progress. The first, and incredibly important, is we have good science informing good policy. This is the foundation for a lot of action in the Chesapeake region. For more than 3 decades, university partners, government agencies, not-for-profits, investing in an understanding of how this system works, what it needs to be healthy, and how that can tie back to management activities. So we have quite a sophisticated body of science built over time that allows us to understand what does healthy look like and how might our management actions drive us towards that. That leads us to be more effective and more efficient at the management actions that we might take. So here's a map of where we think the heaviest nitrogen loading is coming from. And in this example, it allows us to think about if we're spending dollars in the agricultural sector to target better management practices on farms, we would want to go to the darker spaces first, because we know we can gain more by working in those places than we may in some of the lighter color, the tan areas. Now, connecting that to policy, here in the United States, we have something called the Clean Water Act, which establishes standards for water quality for a variety of water bodies. And in the case of the Chesapeake, for many decades, it was not meeting those water quality standards, particularly for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. So after some litigation and a lot of voluntary efforts, essentially a regulatory effort was undertaken in 2010 called a TMDL. And I think instead of telling you what the acronym is, it's maybe more effective to just call it a pollution diet. So what this is an opportunity, again, based upon science, to say how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment can the Chesapeake absorb and still remain healthy. Let's take a look at what that number looks like compared to what we are at today, and then allocate goals, in our case, for each of the individual states to make reductions over some period of time. So this brings accountability, verification. It builds in opportunities for state and federal agencies to develop investment schemes over that period of time to try to achieve these goals. And it has backstops, regulatory backstops, that agencies that have regulatory authority can step in if progress is not being made. So again, here we are, that science and that policy leading to essentially allocations of reductions that need to be made by individual states, in our case, to try to achieve what we're calling clean water or health. So that's success factor number one, I would say, good science informing good policy. The second would be radical collaboration. And obviously the Chesapeake Bay is much larger than East Anglia, but nevertheless, I think this is still a relevant point. In our case, we have 6 states, 6 state governments, 13 federal agencies, hundreds and hundreds of local government entities. We need to collaborate, and we need to find ways to collaborate effectively. In the Chesapeake, we have important leadership that brings that kind of collaboration to bear. We also have a shared leadership model amongst the federal and state agencies that involve the important components of those jurisdictions, as well as local governments and citizens and nonprofits and industry, and a lot of bureaucracy, quite frankly. And I don't say that pejoratively. I say that because I think a level of bureaucracy is important for coordination and management of effort over time. And so that means a lot of meetings, as indicated in this image here. But I will say this collaboration that needs to happen time after time after time is essential to the progress that we've seen. The third and last point that I'll make about why I think we've seen progress over time is long-term consistency. This next slide is busy, and my apologies for that, but I want to show this effort takes time. We started making investments in this watershed more than 40 years ago. So it's been more than a 4-decade effort to just start to turn the corner and improve water quality. And it requires that long-term consistency to try to make that level of improvement. It means having political support. It means having economic investment in these places. It means engaging people on a day in and day out basis to maintain that level of effort. It took hundreds of years for the Chesapeake to degrade, and we shouldn't expect to be able to turn it around in a few years, rather quite a bit. So I'm going to wrap up here and thank you all with a concluding slide of just that collaboration and that long-term consistency that's required to realize clean water goals, shared goals across many jurisdictions over large areas. And I'll be happy when we get to the Q&A section of our area here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you again.
Thank you. So that was Mark. As I mentioned in the introduction, but unfortunately Mark is not able to join us for the Q&A. So if you have questions on his talk, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will be able to send it to him and then get you an answer back. So our last presentation is going to be about Cuenca Verde in Medellin. Kirst, if you could upload that, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Felipe Guerrero. I'm the director of Cuenca Verde, the waterfront for Medellin and its metropolitan area. The idea today is for me to share a bit of our story with you, and hopefully in our experiences you will find some lessons that you could apply to your own projects. I'm gonna share my screen now. Okay. So what is Cuenca Verde? Well, as a waterfront, Cuenca Verde promotes water security and governance. Here we can see where it is located in the northern region of Colombia, in the Andes. As a waterfront, we're a coordinating instrument for the public and private sectors, the communities, to protect and improve the conditions of the water basins that supply water to the city and to the communities around the city. So why create Cuenca Verde? Well, what we see in this map here, we see the city of Medellin, the municipality of Medellin, and this orange lines identify the different water basins. So here we have this water basin where the city is located. It only provides about 10% of the water that it consumes. So we rely on external water basins. Here, there's one in the north, and there's another one here in the east. And those two water basins provide about 91% of the water for human consumption. So in 2010, EPM, which is the public utility for water and energy, as well as the Nature Conservancy, start to join forces to create a water fund, a collective action mechanism to protect those water basins, which provide a crucial environmental service, which is water or water security. Unfortunately, there's a degradation of these water basins for multiple reasons, including deforestation, loss of biodiversity, and strategic ecosystems. Agricultural and cattle farming expansion, as well as urban expansion, are some of those main drivers. There's also a decline in water quality. There's intensive use of agrochemicals in these sectors. There are domestic and industrial water discharges directly into rivers and streams, as well as solid waste, which also affects water quality. And there's also an issue of increased vulnerability to climate events and variability. So we're also mitigating strategy as we implement nature-based solutions that help us adapt to climate change and mitigate emissions. And there's a deficient regional water governance. There are 3 water basins, as we saw in the map. There are many policy instruments that ideally would be more coordinated Unfortunately, they are not as aligned as one would hope. But we are working. That is one of the areas where we want to help. Here we see some images of the water reservoirs. This one is the one in the north. This one is the one in the east. We have some beautiful nature here in the region. In terms of objectives and what we do, well, we have a main operational objective of to impact 27,408 hectares by 2026. This impact indicator translates into interventions in farmers' lands through conservation agreements. And through those agreements, we conserve or restore forests or forest lands, or we promote the adoption of sustainable practices in lands used for agriculture and cattle farming. Generally, about 30% of the hectares are for conservation and restoration. About 70% are for best practices in agriculture and cattle farming. Some of those practices involve silvopastoral systems and different techniques for sustainable and agriculture and organic agriculture. Out of this goal of 27,408 hectares, by 2020, we reached 14,537. We're a bit above our goal for 2020, but there are complexities that we'll have to navigate in future years. In terms of active restoration, well, this is what it looks like. The vegetation quickly grows here throughout this 2-year period. It's very satisfying to see. Here we have the isolation of a forest to prevent cattle from going in there and messing things up. We have to protect what's still there. In terms of objectives, we'll also maybe looking at some possible changes to rely more on best practices to change that dynamic that has led to water basin degradation. We also try to do holistic interventions. We provide septic tanks where they're absent. We also do education and workshops with the communities. We do erosion control, as well as we have a strategy for payments for environmental services. And we also do some monitoring of water biodiversity and socioeconomic criteria. Here we have some more images of activities with communities and educational workshops with children. Here we have a structure to control erosion and prevent sediments from going into the stream. And we have some septic tanks here installed for this house to prevent direct discharges into water streams and rivers. In terms of an iconic victory, this little guy that you see here, he's known as the Gorrión Montes Paisa, or Atlopetes Blanquiae. It was thought to be extinct for decades, but then in 2018 it was found again. It's still critically endangered, but its resurgence led to a social event where we were able to locate the species in several lots where we signed conservation agreements with farmers. So it's very gratifying to know that our work is protecting this iconic and beautiful and vulnerable species. It's a moving story, and I've actually included a link here for those who may be interested in learning more. So who is Cuenca Verde? It is a nonprofit corporation. It's a public-private alliance. As I mentioned, the main drivers have been EPM, the public utility, and the Nature Conservancy. They were able to find other partners, including the city of Medellin, the Urban Environmental Authority, and the Environmental Authority to the east. We also have some local players from the private sector. We also have Coca-Cola FEMSA and the Latin American Alliance for Water Funds, which includes the Nature Conservancy, FEMSA Foundation, Inter-American Development Bank, the Global Environment Fund, and the German Ministry of Environment. We also do alliances with other organizations on more specific projects. We have an operating budget of approximately $250,000. We're constantly trying to be leaner to facilitate financial sustainability. And currently we have a bit more than 50 people employed in all of our different programs. So how does collective action actually work? Well, Cuenca Verde signs project agreements with one or more of its partners, and these agreements contribute to the operating objective of 27,408 hectares. And by partners, I mean these partners that make up the corporation. In addition to funding for projects, operating costs are partially covered with interest payments generated from seed capital that were contributed by EPM, the private sector, and the Latin American Water Fund Alliance. The public sector also contributes willingly through specific projects and through support on technical matters. As already mentioned, EPM and the Nature Conservancy have been some of the biggest drivers. EPM has been the single largest investor. Here on the right, we see how in the period 2014 to 2020, project investment has been largely EPM, more than 75, close to 80%. Although we do work with other partners as well to mobilize resources for our projects. In terms of decision making, well, for regular decision making, there's the board with 5 votes. EPM has 2 of those. The city of Medellin has 1, and we have 1 for environmental authorities, which rotates each year, and we have 1 for the private sector. In terms of, well, how does the funding work? Well, once we sign project agreements with partners, we obtain the funding, then we find farmers who are wanting to work with us. We sign conservation agreements for 10 years, and farmers commit to do maintenance on the interventions that are made. Some activities we do ourselves, other we hire. There are complex logistical elements that we have to navigate. Expenses must be tracked and reported. Cuenca Verde does not earn money by executing this type of agreement. That makes financial sustainability somewhat difficult, but we manage. And generally, funding continues as progress and expenses are reported to the funder. Also, in terms of financial sustainability, we provide some services as a contractor in activities that are related to our purpose to generate value from a market perspective as well. In terms of results indicators and monitoring, well, due to the size of the water basins, the external water basins being approximately 150,000 hectares, and there's a large number of actors involved, we work on an indicator based in hectares, as opposed to one of, say, water quality, because there are many variables outside of control, and working with hectares make our goals more and more tangible. We monitor the water quality in the basins, and we also scan for specific sources of degradation, and generally work through EPM to report specific issues to environmental authorities. But we do try to work directly with environmental authorities and with municipalities on projects to protect the water basins. And well, measuring impact has been difficult. We're currently unable to link interventions to specific changes in water quality or quantity. Better planning at earlier stages would have helped, but we are currently correcting curves and working with the team and with the Nature Conservancy to improve the impact evaluation plan for Cuenca Verde. Well, that is all. I hope our story is useful to you. Thank you for giving us the space, and I hope you all have a nice day. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we have quite a few questions in the chat that have come through during the presentations. And if you wouldn't mind, we'd like to start with the questions that are addressed to our presenters, and then we'll go back to Norfolk and discuss specific questions that relate to Norfolk. But obviously, the two are related because there's a vast universe of collective action platforms from which we could pick examples to present to you today. We will be drawing from other examples as we progress. As we mentioned, this benefit of being part of a network is that there's a lot of experience we can pull from. But we selected those examples because they're particularly relevant for the circumstances of Norfolk. So I'd like to ask Brooke, there are a number of questions addressed to you in terms of how can you deal with, in terms of technical terms, with this issue of excess rainfall in the winter and drought in the summer? What kind of solutions have you been able to deploy? You showed us an example in your talk. And also, how have you been able to coordinate collective action through the use of model? There were specific questions about whether you use modeling tools and whether you use the transparency that putting information on a website brings as well to enable this collective action. Over to you, Brooke. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Nice to talk to you all live in addition to the recording. To answer the questions, I am going to share my screen just so I can go back to certain slides, if that's okay, and I'll be brief. But so in regards to the first question, wanted to share this slide again. Oops. That shows the location of the various recharge projects as far as how to deal with the precipitation and uncertainty. As I mentioned, some of our recharge projects use treated effluent, which is like a constant source of recharge, but other of them use stormwater. And I'm guessing from your area too, that there might be, it rains at different places, different times, even in the same season. So what we've done is where we can build recharge projects in different parts of the watershed to collect water from where we know we have those either impaired watersheds or where we have impervious surfaces. So, and kind of with the approach that the more dispersed projects we have, we're going to capture as many of those storms as possible because they are so, even in the same storm system, we might be generating like this down in the Palominas flood control project. We got more rainfall even in one event than downstream near this Bella Vista project. And we can see that through our monitoring that we have at the sites. And the Palominas site is, again, one of those impaired watersheds. It's a small catchment basin where there is some ongoing development. But then in Bella Vista, that is actually downstream from our most urbanized area. And so we're hoping that we can capture more of that rainfall that's coming off the hard surface. And we've done a lot of the modeling to look at pre and post development to anticipate how much of that flood peak we can capture. So in our particular area, we want to make sure that a certain amount of flushing flood flow is still making it to the river, which is ecologically important for the river. So, the answer to that question is having as many projects located in the places where we can capture that water. And is that any other? Okay. And as far as the question about how do we coordinate results to monitor across different sites and how do we present those results? So as I mentioned, oops, let's see, we have these three, well, I would focus you to, we do have data that is collected on a regional basis through that kind of regional framework that I talked about here. That's been data that's been collected for period of, in some cases, stream gauges back 100 years to data that's just been started collecting in recent decades. And that framework is, as I mentioned, right now it's scattered across different federal databases that are technically publicly accessible, but really hard to find. So we were able to get funding through a federal grant paired with local match to take all that data. And we're actually in the process of building a hydrologic web portal where people can click on a map of the area and actually select various data points and pull out that data on the fly. And then also look at so you could look at groundwater levels compared to river flows and look at change over time. And so that's going to be a really important tool that'll be available for people to look at the regional data. But then, as I also mentioned, we're collecting data through the CCRN on these individual sites. And I will highlight in a lesson we learned very importantly quickly is the importance of collecting both baseline data and then also post-project implementation data. And we've been collecting that data again in paper reports, and we're also in the process of turning that kind of buried data into something that's more publicly accessible. And we're in the process of pulling this together into a master report that'll be available publicly as well. And both of those will be available on our website. So ccrnsanpedro.org. We're hoping to also produce one of those like ArcGIS story maps where you can pull out data. And then also the uppersanpedropartnership.org will have the web portal available there. But just very quickly to answer one last question is that regarding the modeling is that you have monitoring data that's showing you what's happening in one point of time, and then you can look at the past trend, but how do we check if our data is moving towards the predictions from the groundwater model? And so we're also in the process of investing in updating our model to an integrated surface and groundwater MikeShe model that's actually going to be able to integrate real-time precipitation data. It's going to be able to include some of the climate scenarios from the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, and it'll allow us to look at our monitoring results and see in a more refined way how we're tracking towards those predicted results. So lots going on, lots of past science, but also some really great new work that's being done as well. So great questions, thank you.
And we're trying to get Brooke to help us with Norfolk situation as well, if time allows. So maybe now I'd like to turn to Felipe Guerrero, if you could switch on your camera. There were a number of questions that I thought you would be well placed to address, particularly, I mean, from the point of view of the type of solutions, again, whether some of the solutions that you deploy are addressed at reducing nitrogen in the water, and how do you do so in terms of capturing nitrogen that goes into the water? And then from a point of view of operations, how you established, there was a question about whether the organization is not for profit or for profit. And then lastly, I would say a question was about how do you ensure that you can commit the landowners with whom you work to commit to long-term land use changes, given that there's a lot of factors that can happen during that period of time. So over to you if you could offer your views on these 3 points. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. Well, on the first question about nitrogen, initially there was a model that predicted a reduction based on the interventions for conservation and restoration. As I mentioned, the monitoring has been a bit challenging, but what we do is, and right now we're trying to strengthen the sustainable agriculture program. One of the things we do is analyze the soil to determine what are the actual needs for the fertilizers used for crops. So often what we see is an overuse because there's a lack of knowledge on how to apply or how to optimize their use. So by analyzing soil, by providing that that training, we can teach people how to use fertilizers adequately. And we are trying to push organic fertilizers, so that would have an impact on nitrogen. And as I mentioned, right now we're also working on improving impact indicators. So trying to have better data in terms of how much was used before, how much was used after the intervention, and so we can have a clear idea of how we're reducing that nitrogen element. In terms of being nonprofit or for profit, yeah, we are nonprofit. So basically, but we do, like as I mentioned, we do some work as contractors because we do need to be financially independent. Ideally, that is a pressure that we constantly face. We are dependent on the funding of one particular partner, as you saw in the presentation. And so by being able to create value from a market perspective, we also fortify our ability to operate and to develop projects that we want to develop. Any money that we make is spent back into programs, so nobody's making money out of it. And then in terms of how to commit to long-term changes or to long-term land use changes, that's a good question. And we're actually working with the Nature Conservancy and Sylvestrum to explore the carbon credit space. It's challenging because it would involve having to sign these agreements for 30 years. We see that as a bit of a challenge, but we are exploring this idea. And as I mentioned, in the future, we might be looking at more interventions in terms of good practices. If we are able to promote silvopastoral systems and sustainable agriculture practices, then we'll be reducing the need to expand the area to keep up that production. And these systems have also been proven to be, well, there are clear economic benefits in the long term. We just need to bridge that gap initially, because there is an investment that's needed initially, but once that gets implemented, then we have long-term benefits for the farmers in these areas, which is great. If we can, the economic aspect and the environmental aspect can go hand in hand, well, that would be great. And we believe that would be a way to impact or to prevent further degradation and deforestation in future years.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, and I would say maybe we have another 5 minutes. So if you have other questions for the panelists, please come through now. There were a number of questions with respect to Norfolk. I don't know if you've had a look, Felipe, and if there's specific questions that you felt you wanted to answer specifically for Norfolk as well. And same goes to you for Brooke, in terms of what other points, what reflections after having heard the presentation of the issues in Norfolk, what do you think your experience could best contribute? Maybe for you, Brooke, given that you were listening to the presentation.
Listening to the presentations, I think the state of Arizona has a few different examples and lessons that we could share. I think in the San Pedro, we just have really stellar collective action platforms that we've been able to share and develop over the years, but relevant to some of your other issues and goals. Up in the Phoenix area, which is one of the major cities in Arizona, is fed by surface and groundwater as well, and major metro area. And they have the Salt Verde Alliance, which is a water fund, another one of the water funds. There could be some neat lessons there learned there. And then up in the actual Verde River Basin, a lot of the actions that they're taking are agricultural interventions. So I think there could be some neat lessons from there as well. And as far as there was a question about dealing with excessive rainfall at the wrong times of the year. Yeah, I mean, that's really the trick, right? Like the climate is changing in a way that's kind of changing how we've currently operated infrastructure. And I mean, I'm not sure what the aquifer systems in your area, if the concept of using groundwater as a reservoir or aquifers as reservoirs is an idea that's taking shape in Arizona as well, not only as a traditional reservoir like a dam type of situation, but thinking about the aquifer systems themselves in ways that you can store water. Yeah, and as far as benefits for people, that's not something I necessarily touched upon with the groundwater recharge projects, but as we're building these projects that benefit the river, they're also raising groundwater levels locally. So you're taking water that's a nuisance and creating a benefit out of it. And again, that takes a lot of the science, where is the best location? And yeah, and the climate data is really important, how things are changing. Global weirding, everything's just getting weird. So how do we adapt to that?
Yeah, no, thank you.
If I could add one thing in terms of a lesson learned here, it would be more of a legal aspect because of the way we're set up, and because there's a majority of private actors in our nonprofit. There is a bit of a challenge to access funds that are meant to be invested by public sector, by the municipalities, by the environmental authorities. So that makes cooperation a bit difficult. So just making sure that that configuration of the organization is compatible with access to funds would be quite useful.
But actually, there was a question in the chat about how do you get private corporates to contribute willingly funding into the funds. So is that something you could comment on? How did you get so much private sector interest into the fund?
Right. Well, as I mentioned, that was done at the beginning. So when EPA and TNC started working on this, they were able to get other partners. I mean, water is something that is fundamental for economic growth and for economic well-being. So, so the private corporations or private partners saw that, they were able to recognize it, and so they made this investment of an initial seed capital, which we were able to year after year, get returns on that, so that they don't constantly have to be providing funds, but that initial investment sort of contributes over a number of years.
Thank you. Yes, so just to clarify, this type of endowment fund is something that we've used in a number of water funds. And to answer directly the question from Melissa, I would say almost all of our water funds are not-for-profit organizations, but then have a mix of sources that are brought in from corporates, from endowment. Some of it is fed directly into implementation. Some of the funding goes into endowment funds. So I think we'll have to close that part of the session. Thank you very much, so that we can then go back also to answer some of the questions specific to Norfolk. There's one question I just wanted to touch on before we move on to Rachel's presentation, which is, there's a question about what will be the new funding streams. And Felipe, you mentioned carbon credits is something that you are looking into. And obviously in the UK, we have biodiversity credits that are going to become mandatory with a mandatory net gain sort of legislation through the Environment Bill. And to answer the question, this is definitely something that we can look into through the Water Fund as a collective action platform. In fact, TNC is supporting one project looking at mobilizing funding for water outcomes from biodiversity net gain credits. But what the Water Fund can do, what the collaborative action platform can do, is also to enable facilitated learning around these new funding sources, because so it could be funding for the fund itself or for the partners into the collaborative action platform, so that they don't always have to reinvent the wheel and learn by themselves about how to access these type of funding streams, which are a little bit more challenging perhaps than other more traditional funding streams. So that would be one potential benefit of working together.
That's
So
great.
thank you very much, and I think we'll have to close that session. Thanks for your participation, and we look forward to ongoing collaboration as well with both you, Brooke, and Mark.
Of course. Thank you, Sophie.
Yeah.
And looking forward to it as well.
Bye.
Thank you.
So Rachel, over to you. We're now going to hear about what is happening in Norfolk at the moment in the area of nature-based solutions, so as to be able to identify where could be this potential for greater collaboration and scale. Thank you.
Okay, let me just move my face away. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll run through a mapping exercise that we undertook following a workshop that we did going back quite a way now, sort of April last year. I can't take credit for this analysis, by the way. Colleagues from the Nature Conservancy pulled this together, so I will be referring to some of my notes here from the analysis that they took. Objectives of the Water Initiative's mapping exercise that we undertook. So back in April, as I mentioned, we held a workshop with stakeholders to create a database of projects in Norfolk. The objectives were to build a database of recent, ongoing and future projects in Norfolk that aim to improve freshwater environment outcomes and improve the county's water security. This data this data will be publicly accessible in a visual fashion. We'll probably use something like Tableau or something that makes it more, it comes alive, or some other kind of platform. And this data could potentially be overlaid with information relative to the water security challenges highlighted in Pippa's earlier presentation, to start identifying whether current initiatives are targeting areas with greatest needs. But I do want to stress that this is just the start. So if you have projects that you want to include in the mapping exercise, we'll explain just at the end how we can do that and how you can get involved. So what information have we collected so far? We have obtained and analysed data on water resource management projects or initiatives in Norfolk that have either already been implemented or are planned, with particular emphasis on initiatives undertaken by actors other than water companies and which incorporate nature-based solutions. This data was provided to us at that workshop last year and was complemented with publicly available material collated via the website. So that does mean the time lag from last April means that some of the information may no longer be current and will need to be updated as well, potentially. But this at least gives a starting point for understanding the types of activities in place in the region. It is intended as a basis for discussion. And we are inviting everyone to share additional information on ongoing projects so as to complement data already collected. So again, we'll mention that towards the end of this workshop. Overview of results collected so far. The number of water initiatives considered so far that we did was 28, with a list of organisations involved on the right there, the main organisations involved on the right. And the lead organisations by type is shown on that bar chart. As you would expect, the NGOs are kind of doing a large bulk of this kind of work at the moment. There were projects, 18 specific projects by location. That's either single or multiple location, 7 ongoing partnerships or initiatives, and 3 catchment management plans. And then the projects was also split by geographical scope. And so there were, as I mentioned, 18 specific single or multiple locations, 6 Norfolk-wide, 2 regional, and two we didn't have the information for. So we've pulled out 3 examples of initiatives we collected so far to show you on this slide, with the focus on 3 types of security challenges addressed, water security challenges addressed, which is water quality. You'll see there's 15 of those in the 28 we looked at, 10 for water availability and 8 for flooding. And the co-benefits referenced most frequently are biodiversity, community resilience, climate change adaptation and mitigation. So I'll just quickly run through those 3 examples. The Norfolk Ponds projects, and I have to say we are very pleased that Professor Carl Sayer is in the audience today, who discovered a rare plant, and if I get this right, it's a grass poly in the banks of a Norfolk farm pond. That plant hasn't been seen for over 100 years or so, so I'm informed. So, but in terms of the Norfolk Ponds project, it's a water quality one. It provides advice standards of good practice on the creation, restoration and management of ponds, generates funding for pond conservation, inspiring and informing landowners and communities, and delivers strategic pond conservation at a landscape scale with emphasis on landscape connectivity and character. Water availability, led by Norfolk Rivers Trust and the Broads Authority. This is a total River Wensum catchment plan, which is engagement with landowners in the upper catchment, trialling exemplar net gain exercise with the development community, plus natural farm management partnership at Dereham, which Anglian Water has a works just near there, and the development of a partnership with the Upper Wensum Cluster Farm Group with extensive restoration projects. And on flooding, we pulled out an example with Norfolk and Wildlife Trust and the Environment Agency, which is the Norfolk Catchment Flood Management Plan, which gives an overview of the flood risk in the North Norfolk CFMP area and sets out their preferred plan for sustainable flood risk management over the next 50 to 100 years, supporting a wider habitat and visitor management project that helps manage this flagship coastal site for change. I think I've just gone further ahead. No, there we go. Types of nature-based solutions implemented. So of the 28 we analysed, 17 initiatives include one or more multiple nature-based solutions at catchment level, falling into the categories shown on the left. It's great to see that agricultural best management practices, regenerative agriculture is kind of on the top there, one of the most, which is really good to see. And then there were other types of, so again, there's a list of sort of nature-based type projects, but there were also other solutions. Let me just move this out of the way. Implemented, for example, in-stream solutions, so sediment removal, community engagement, education program and knowledge sharing, data support, education funding schemes for apprenticeships. So these wouldn't necessarily sort of the in-stream solution be classified necessarily as a nature-based solution for this kind of category of this work that we're doing. So nature-based type projects by example, I was going to run through a few of these as well from our analysis back in April. This is what we pulled together. So water sensitive farming, the Norfolk Rivers Trust, which is a Norfolk-wide initiative providing independent farm support and advice. The aim is to deliver practical on-farm measures that improve the quality and resilience of the surrounding water environment. Then there's the SSI protection Bryant Heath at Felmingham. And the purpose of the trial is to develop an integrated land and water management plan for enhancing the condition of a small SSI in Norfolk that has been designated for a combination of dry and wet heath. Tipping the balance with a focus is on re-establishing clear water and aquatic plant life in 2 of the largest Norfolk Broads owned by the Norfolk Wildlife Trust, which is Ranworth and Barton. And then the Upper Thurne Holistic Water Management Project, which is with the Broadland Catchment Partnership, which obviously Water Resources is also involved in, which is part of the government's 25-year environment plan. This project is one of the 4 initial pilot catchments for testing innovative approaches to reforming water abstraction. The Upper Thurne Integrated Improvement Scheme will investigate the current and forecast weather level management requirements having regard for predicted climate change scenarios. And then we looked at, from the analysis, from the 28 that we had, we looked at the funding sources and we found information, it's kind of a key one here, but we found information on funding the 17 of the water initiatives. 9 had one single source of funding, while the others either had two or multiple. So you can see by far, well, not by far, but the public funding and water company is sort of key here for the projects that are already in existence. And then 3 were funded corporately by another non-water company. 2 from direct income from other sources. And there was none from land revenues. And then there were 2 that we didn't have the information on to kind of work that out. And then in terms of examples of results indicators, only a few of these initiatives that we found had clear indicators that could be transparently reported upon. So some of the indicators are sediment removed, ponds created and restored, farmers advised, farmers participating in events, water replenished, edge habitat restored, and fish exclusion barriers installed. So that would be kind of another area that we need to look at in terms of the indicators. Conclusions and next steps. So considerations of our findings are based on the context and the relevance of certain types of interventions relative to the territory or landscape. Our initial results indicate that while a great variety of nature-based solutions have been implemented in Norfolk, maybe nature-based solutions have not been comprehensively adopted so far. And so part of this exercise is questions for attendees on this call to consider. Obviously not now, but something to think about is, does your initial perception of the Norfolk context match these results? I appreciate again that I quickly whizzed through some of these examples, and these were collected quite some time ago, so things may have changed. Could you provide additional examples so that we can build a database that is representative as possible with what is currently going on in Norfolk? It would be good to hear about those, for example, those schemes, those initiatives for those people that weren't at last April's workshop. And then another thing to consider is, what additional information do you think we should seek to collect for these initiatives? Thank you.
It's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Rachel, and thanks very much to our colleague Anna Favero from the Nature Conservancy, who did a lot of that work collating things with Rachel. And I guess the point there is that was a year ago, even before we created this partnership. We started a conversation with many stakeholders in Norfolk about what are the sort of things that are going on, what are the sort of things that are happening in the county. And I think I'm sure that the presentation Rachel just given has just shown the wide variety of options, and also the amount of opportunities that are out there and the amount of action which is already being taken. And our role is to see how we can join some of these together into something at the sort of scale that Brooke, Mark, and Felipe have shown to us this afternoon. We're coming towards the end now. Sophie and I are going to just talk through the next steps in a moment. Then I'm going to invite Steve Moncaster to just give some closing comments, and then invite Henry to close the event this afternoon. We've had a lot of questions this afternoon. I think that's absolutely fantastic. That's the beauty of an event like this, is there's an opportunity to ask lots of questions. Unfortunately, there isn't always the opportunity to answer all of those questions. And what I think we'll have to do is we'll have to take some of those questions away and answer them. I think Sophie will talk at the end around a questionnaire we're going to send you all. So again, if we want to make this interactive, get some interaction with you after the event. So Sophie will mention the questionnaire we're going to send in a moment. There are some questions there that there's some really great questions, and the questions that you're asking, which is absolutely fantastic, and just shows, really thank you for your engagement this afternoon in this. I'll just very briefly show you the next steps. I'll just share my screen. Please give me as I just go to the next steps between Sophie and I. Okay, so looking at the what you've seen this afternoon, one of the key messages this afternoon is obviously the importance of of kind of good governance and having governance in place. My slides are jumping around a little bit. Having governance in place, and what we want to do over the next, well, what we're in the process of doing now is seeing what sort of governance structure can we put in place just to mirror. I think we've seen some of the partnerships that Brooke, that Mark, that Felipe have been very successful in setting up. And just our kind of first attempt at this as something just as a very interim kind of just temporary governance structure just to get us up and running. We have a core partnership. Obviously, this work is being funded through Anglian Water, through Norfolk County Council, via the district councils, and Rob Young from Norfolk District Council is representing the wider the districts across the county, the Nature Conservancy, and ourselves. So we are kind of a core group which is formed just to really get us to this point, plan for today's workshop, etc. What we've then done is we've invited a number of organisations to then form an initial steering committee. And as I say, please don't worry if your organisation isn't on here yet. This is just an initial steering committee to get us off the ground. There are a couple of organisations that haven't yet confirmed whether they will be joining us or not, but organisations that have already committed are Norfolk Rivers Trust, the Broads Authority, the Water Management Alliance representing the internal drainage boards, Natural England, the Environment Agency, the New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership, and the CLA and the NFU. And as I say, a couple more organisations hoping to join. We've got to keep this kind of manageable number. And this group, and then what we then sitting around this the kind of steering committee is then, of course, is all of you as our advisory group. This is, as I said right at the very beginning, everything we do within Water Resources East is very much focused on co-creation and collaboration. This is not something we will do, behind closed doors, or anyone will be excluded. And the more people are involved, the more information, the more ideas you give us, the richer the output, the outcomes that we will achieve. So you are officially now welcome to our advisory group for this process, which is fantastic. I'm a little bit behind in my task, which is to prepare some terms of reference for each of these groups, and we will publicise this. You will have noticed that, you may have noticed, but Nancy and colleagues in WRE have created a fantastic section on our website specifically for this project. So we have a dedicated page, microsite within our website. So we'll publish all of these things, and we'll use that as a part of our way of communicating with you all as our advisory group. We're hoping to get the first steering committee held in March, and then we will collectively decide kind of when is the most appropriate time. We're all very, very busy people. We don't want to gather you on a 2.5 hour, 3 hour Zoom call every week. So what is the most appropriate? But rest assured, we will all be together again over the next couple of months to discuss this and see where we've got to, and importantly what we're going to be doing. So hand over to Sophie just to talk us through the next steps from. I think, Sophie, do you have a separate slide for me? Or was it on those slides?
I think it was on the same one. Yeah. Do you have it?
Go back. Let me go back in. My apologies. I really should have done a Chris Whitty and just gone next slide to somebody very clever, shouldn't I, rather than trying this myself. So my apologies. Okay. Here we go. No, it's not there, Sophie. Sorry, your wonderful slide. You have it.
You need to stop. We needed to have a technical glitch at some stage. I think you need to stop sharing so I can stop sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, here we are. I think, can you see it?
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Sophie.
Excellent. So yes, so as Robin was saying, we basically today is our launch event. We didn't have that much time for engagement. We're hoping also with the lifting of COVID restrictions, we'll have the possibility of having some direct engagement with many of you all, because as we can see, it's a very complex sort of set of stakeholder engagement that we will need to carry out. And thank you very much for all your interest expressed in the Q&A. So in terms of next steps, this gives you a sort of a trajectory of where we headed towards. So our target is effectively by September 2022 to publish a final plan for Norfolk with summary findings, but that will be in effect the beginning of a journey rather than the end. It's very much not a sort of project, sort of task and finish endeavor, but the idea is to set up the governance and funding platform that will be most appropriate for the circumstances of Norfolk. I think what the presentations have made clear is that there are varieties of governance platforms that can be established depending on what the needs are. So the process that we will follow from now to September 2022 will help us identify what this platform should look like. And in the journey towards that date, we have a key few dates here. So in June, we would like to confirm what the priority water challenges we would like this platform to focus on would be. You heard from Philippa, there are a range: flooding, water scarcity, water quality. Some NBS, some nature-based solutions can help address multiple of these water quality challenges. So we may want to focus on those that can target all these challenges. And the identification of these water challenges will be, or this prioritization, will be based on a multiplicity of work streams, which includes stakeholder engagement, the mapping of existing initiatives. So we will send you a form that will enable us to gather additional information on the projects that you are already existing or that are at conception stage, so that we can place that on the map and have this initial function, if you want, of information clearinghouse, so that everybody is clear on what is happening. Also, funders can have access to this information so that they know what is happening where. We will also, during that period, carry out a funding stream analysis to understand how much money has been spent in Norfolk on this type of interventions so far, and how much funding is likely to come going forward. What would be the conditionalities for this funding? Who can access funding, how, and that will feed into a guide to funding NBS that we will be releasing by July 2021. So that again will be a contribution to all actors, a sort of shared investment, if you want, to help you understand where to go to instead of having every time to gather this type of information. Then between the summer and the end of the year, we will need to carry out some science-based analysis to identify what would be reasonable results target, what would be the right type of results indicators as well that we can share across the region so that we can all track progress based on the same results indicators, and what would be an initial sort of way to prioritize investment options. This is not a lot of time, so we will need to do a first level of analysis, and then ongoing prioritization will need to take place going forward. But we don't want to spend 3 years doing prioritization and nothing happens. So the idea is to do an iterative process of prioritization. And that will also give us the basis for defining what are the optimal governance and funding arrangements that can enable this collective action to be put in place. So that will require a number of work streams to be carrying out in parallel, pulling on multiple sort of areas of specialism, and this is where we will pull in your knowledge and expertise. And it may be that we actually set up, also some specific working groups. Brooke just commented that in the case of Arizona, having a science-based committee or science working group has been very useful. So this summarizes the type of work streams that we will undertake. With a focus on stakeholder engagement and communications, on legal analysis and governance. A number of you in the chat pointed out that there were issues with the type of flooding sort of regulations that are in place, so we can carry out some of this analysis. Then there's a whole science-based prioritization stream that requires modeling, that requires data gathering and identifying what existing models are there, what is needed to go one step further. On the basis of that, we will conduct socioeconomic studies and return on investment analysis. And the Nature Conservancy has developed a full approach to do this with a guidance document and the benefit of having done it in other places. That will then enable us to define the funding strategy. So we will start on this work stream very soon in terms of mapping what funding exists, what are the funding sources, and then once we've defined the needs for investment, we will refine that funding strategy. So these work streams run across this whole period I have set out. And monitoring and learning, as you've heard, is very important and is one of the benefits as well as of collective action, particularly in an area such as NBS, where there is still not a lot of information on effectiveness and cost effectiveness. It's sometimes patchy, so doing it in a conjoint manner will help us a lot. And for all of these work streams, we will be receiving also support from TNC colleagues, Anglian Water. It's a joint effort, and we'll be procuring services of consultants as we go forward. So this is my last slide. Back to you, Robin, for perhaps questions and closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we're pretty much bang on time, so I think we won't do any further questions. As I say, we will commit to answering the questions and publishing them on the website. I think what it'd be great now to do is if I can bring Dr. Steve Moncaster, WRE's technical director, just onto the virtual stage, just to give us your reflection, Steve, in terms of what you've heard this afternoon as you coordinate kind of WRE's technical program, and then if you can hand over to Henry just to bring the afternoon to a rousing finish, that'd be fantastic. So, Steve, are you there?
I am Robin, but I'm looking at Sophie's slide, so I'm not sure if you want to move that.
I think we have, I think we may have done. So don't worry about that. Just
so I think the first thing to say is this afternoon's been brilliant. It's not often I get a chance to sit and listen and think about a lot of stuff, and I've been able to do that for a couple of hours this afternoon. The presentations have been excellent, and the questions have been excellent too as well. And I've been looking at those and thinking about what it means for the WRE program and for the work we're going to do in Norfolk as well. So before I say anything, I want to say thanks to the presenters, because it's just been great this afternoon. In terms of summarising, I suppose what I'm struck by immediately is just the enormous parallels between the issues that we're dealing with in Norfolk and these issues that we're seeing in other places where TNC have been working with water funds. So this problem that we have in terms of allocating water and getting the right balance between nature and the economy and communities and just everything else that we can think of is clearly not something that we are only dealing with. There's plenty of other people who've got those issues as well. If I just summarise what I think I heard in the first session based on Philippa's slide, I think Philippa was really asking the question, is there a burning platform in Norfolk? And I think we know that there is. In parts of the county. There's some really difficult problems that we're trying to deal with right now. But the message is that with climate change and growth and other things in the future, things are going to get worse and not better if we don't actually get our act together and do something. So change is needed is what I took from this morning. And I think from the questions, which, as I said, I found very interesting, one of the things that came through for me is the question, why are we here? So is it what the farmers are doing? Is it what the water companies are doing? The planning authorities seem to be in the crosshairs for some people as well. And that led me to the question, really, what is it that needs to change? And if we're going to sort of change stuff, how do we know that we're going to get the right outcomes? And I think in the case studies that we've seen this afternoon, we saw some of the answers, which I think is great. So if we want change, and if we want the right kind of change, what I heard this afternoon was we need science, okay, we need collaboration, we need funding, and those people that know me will know that I said that stuff often. I often say those are the things that we should be focusing on. But I think the other thing that I heard today, which is new for me, is that we have a bit of an organisational problem as well. And I don't mean that in terms of governance, the sort of thing that Sophie and Robin were talking about. I just mean in terms of this is a huge problem and we have to find a way of splitting it up into bits that we can solve. So for me, the new piece is we need to think about the way we're going to tackle this and split it up into parts that are solvable, stuff that we can do now, and then stuff we need to do in the medium and long term. In a nutshell, what I've written down here is who solves which bit and when. I think the only other thing that came through for me really strongly this afternoon is that water problems are really land and water problems, and in Norfolk we have a land and water problem, and that's the thing we have to solve. So that's probably enough for me. It's well past the hour now, so I'll hand over to Henry. And Henry, if you don't mind, just bringing things to a close.
Thank you, Steve. Well, firstly, I echo Steve's remarks entirely about the quality of the presentations we've had this afternoon. I'm very grateful for everybody for the time that they've put in, not only our home team at Water Resources East, and there aren't very many of you really, are there? You know, Kirsty, Rachel, Robin, Steve, and Nancy, a small team. So punching way above your weight, but you know, with the help of Sophie and the Nature Conservancy, we've really been able to look at, as Steve has said, at things the other side of the world. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the problems that we face are so similar to the problems that other people are facing. One of the takeaway words for me this afternoon has been radical collaboration. And I'm very conscious that we're not very good at communicating with each other, because so many of the problems that we encounter as a society today, the root cause of them is that we don't communicate. We don't freely communicate. Well, there are the keyboard warriors, obviously, on Twitter and Facebook and social media, but I'm saying communicate at a level where we actually collaborate together to make a real difference, a difference that is science informed, solutions that are based on natural processes around nature. And that's going to take time. It's going to take time, and we've all got to work at it. It's not somebody else's problem. It's all of our problem. So my appeal is to keep talking, to keep inputting, to keep working together so that we actually do make a difference, because in my short life, actions always speak rather louder than words, and it's actions that are going to need to be taken in Norfolk. And I'm just so thrilled that the Nature Conservancy Council and the Norfolk County Council, Anglian Water, Water Resources East have set it as their goal to actually work together. And I'm grateful for Andrew Jemison for his introductory remarks, and also to Vince Muspratt, Councillor Muspratt, who sits on the board of Water Resources East and has been a tremendous proponent of this Norfolk strategy. He has really put his weight behind it, and I'm very grateful for him for that, because it is through enthusiasm and it is through passion and it is through a will to get things done that will make a difference. So I'd just like to close by thanking you for your questions, thanking you for your participation, and we will keep communicating and look forward to working with you in the future. So thank you all so much, and I bid you a good evening. Thank you so much. Goodbye.